Oh no, the easel is back. Well, for those of you who were here last week, don't worry, we're not doing any data collecting today. You get to keep your seats. What I'm going to share is actually part of a presentation I made for the College for Congregational Development in Atlanta a few weeks ago. And they liked it, so I was like, well, what the heck, let me share it with you all as well. It was about a different saint, but it works just as well for Saint Gregory, the great Gregory of Rome, our patron saint, whom we celebrate today as we also celebrate the start of this 2025-2026 program year. Before we get to Saint Gregory, though, I want to tell you a little bit about my mornings lately. So I get up, and the first thing I do when I get up is I open up my phone, and I start reading the news. You already know where I'm going. Read, national news, international news, spend more time doing this than I probably should, but then eventually close my phone, get ready, get out of the house. I get in the car, and I turn on WBBM to catch up on Chicago news and news about crime and political fighting and corruption and, troops coming into my city and all those sorts of things. I get to work, get into my office, and because I'm a bad Episcopalian who tries to pretend to be a good Episcopalian, I open up something called the Episcopal News Service, which is like a thing, and read stories about dioceses in crisis and churches closing and lawsuits and investigations. Point being that before I even get to the work of my day, this is what the world seems like to me. Fellow millennials, what do we call this?
Dumpster fire.
The dumpster fire. Thank you so much. This is what I feel like is my work. I had a list of things that I was supposed to do. I have emails needing responding, programs to organize, calls to make, people to visit. But suddenly this feels like my most pressing work, doing something about the dumpster fire. And some of us might disagree about who is holding the fire hose and who is holding the gas can these days. But I think we all share a common sense that some way the world is on fire. Somehow things are kind of crumbling around us. And in trying to live our lives, we start asking ourselves questions like, what can I really do about this? What can we the church, do about the dumpster fire? And is this even our problem? After all, plenty of times in Scripture it says, the world will come to an end. We only have to keep watch, remain faithful, and wait for Jesus to come back. So maybe the dumpster fire isn't even our problem. Maybe we just have to stick with it, come to church, be faithful, and wait for us to be rescued. You find yourself struggling with these kinds of questions too, or is this just me?
No.
Thank you, Sharon. Yes, worry about the grandkids, right? Also, right, maybe, generations, we can see our loved ones. Even if we will not see the end of the dumpster fire, we don't want to pass on the dumpster fire to our kids and our grandkids, our great-grandkids. Here's the thing. One of the things I find most helpful about being part of the church, being a Christian, is that whenever we're in times of crisis, we can always look back at our own history and realize we have been here before. Details might be different, but we have walked into this room before. So, once upon a time, there was a great empire that spanned from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. It was the greatest empire that part of the world had ever seen. Huge accomplishments in transportation and infrastructure, science, understanding, learning, commerce, and military rule and governance at the end of a sword. And at the heart of this great empire was the imperial city itself, the eternal city, Rome. The center of power, the center of wealth, the center of beauty and culture and learning, until it wasn't. Until a little bit at a time and then all at once, it wasn't. It started to disintegrate. It started to burn down a little bit. The capital was moved to the east. The center of political power moved to the east. The structures of governance and of commerce and of law and justice started crumbling along with its literal buildings. And in its place was volatility, things changing really fast, lots of changes all at once, a time of uncertainty. Who's really in charge? What's the law? What are we supposed to be doing? Complexity, a lot of different pieces that we have to keep track of. A lot of moving parts, and we don't know how to wrap our hands around it. And ambiguity. What does the future hold? What is even the meaning of trying to hold this all together anymore? So into this ancient dumpster fire called Rome in the 7th century, there was a young man born to a wealthy family. This was originally St. Benedict of Nursia, but he works just as well as Gregory of Rome. Gregory was born to a wealthy, powerful family, a political family, and also a family that had notable leaders in the church itself. Well respected, we might even call him these days a Nepo baby. Because at the young, tender age of 30, he effectively became the mayor. They didn't call it that, but he effectively became the mayor of Rome. He was put in charge of holding it all together. And he did a pretty good job until he felt this increasing calling that this isn't exactly what he was supposed to be doing. And he felt he was called instead to join a monastery. And not just join a monastery, but he sold all of his goods and he built his own monasteries, as Nepo babies are wont to do. Gregory, as was the way of thinking about it at the day, wanted to escape into a life of contemplation, escape into the life of the monastery, inside safe walls, where you could be guaranteed that people were there to devote themselves to God and to the contemplation of the goodness of God, and to make sure that they were always working towards the awareness of God's goodness in all things. And everything outside of those walls was just somebody else's problem. Nothing to do with us. We are serving God up here. And a wall separates us from the other. And this schema, this idea of the monastery, the contemplative life, the truly religious life as somehow separated from the dumpster fire, reflected a theology that was prevalent in Gregory's day. You have the heavenly sphere and you have the earthly sphere, and they are complete opposites from one another. You could also talk about this spiritual versus secular, sacred versus secular, supernatural versus natural. these different realms, completely separated from one another, except for every so often they intersect. And we call that a miracle. Here's the thing that happens next, though, for Gregory, is that the government of Rome continues to crumble, and there is nobody left who is going to hold it all together. And so the people of Rome, by popular acclamation, elect him the bishop, the pope, the bishop of Rome. And with nobody else to do the work, he decides, we are going to do the work. The church is going to enter the breach. The church is going to enter the gap. I am going to mobilize all of these nuns and these monks and these priests that follow me, and we are going to get to work. The thing is, if you're going to do that, this theology will not do. When the dumpster fire is calling for Christians to do something about it, this theology will not do. So Gregory came up with something different. What if, instead of the earthly and the heavenly separated out and opposites of one another, what if, living in this earthly sphere, the heavenly sits right next to it, inside of it, around it, in the depth of it, above it? What if the heavenly is right there? If we can just see through the earthly? What if the earthly itself is our pathway to see the divine, to see the supernatural, the spiritual, the religious, whatever you want to call it? The goodness of God is waiting there to break through. And we can see it because we carry something of the heavenly within us, too. If that is the case, that allows us to do something very different than trying to escape into here. It gives us a very different idea of what the church is than a set of walls in which we can escape from the dumpster fire of life. Instead, it gives us a task. It gives us a way of living. That if the heavenly is right there, in the details, in the embodied physical nature of life, waiting to break through if we have but the senses to see it, then the life of contemplation, the religious life, and the life of activity in the world, the life of service, the life in the dumpster fire, are actually one and the same. That on the one hand, we are always looking for the goodness of God to break through. That's the contemplative side. And we are always holding out our hands in service, ready to take action. This is something that Gregory calls discretio, the linea discretio, the line of discretion, holding both together. And if we're doing them both right, then we are doing them both at the same time. And this sort of life is what leads to that greatest of Christian virtues that in Latin is called caritas. We translate it as charity, but that's not the right idea. The right idea is self-giving love. This idea that we serve because in serving, the goodness of God is revealed. And in seeking out where there is suffering and vulnerability and injustice, we come even closer to the revelation of God's goodness. Gregory ended up believing this so much that he thought only contemplative monks and nuns would make good administrators. Only those who learn how to do the contemplative life, how to seek and hold the idea of the goodness of God in all things, were the ones who were best able to manage the nitty-gritty and dirty and muddy and bloody and painful details of life. Precisely those who know how to be contemplative in the midst of their action. And that, friends, is the background to why we are this month focusing on what we're calling making sacred space, because that idea of making sacred space is this. It's the idea that we create times and places where we are fully aware of the goodness of God, and in those moments have a better understanding of how we can change the world for the better. Now, I'll also tell you something about Gregory. He also thought the world was about to end. He thought it's just a matter of a few years. Jesus has to be coming. I mean, remember, right? Everything is crumbling. It has to be just a matter of time before Jesus is coming back. And this will all be over. And even so, there is work to be done. The church has work to do. And you know what was at the top of his list? Of all of the administrative nightmares that needed to be taken care of in Rome as the empire was crumbling around them, what was his top priority? Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, house the houseless, heal the sick. That is the difference that a life, a contemplative life, combined with action, that virtue of self-giving love makes in how we then, if we are going to step outside of these walls and take action for the betterment of the world, burning as it may be, it doesn't matter. It is still our work to do. Amen.